So next topic is talking about bone remodeling, right? And we're going to start just by looking at some of these bones that you're going to be learning, right? Your coxal bone or your femur or one of your vertebrae. And one of the things you had to learn not only was the bone themselves, but the features on a bone, right? You had these trochanters, the greater and lesser trochanters. You had spines, right? You had spinous processes and stuff like that. What all these are right here are, or most of them, are going to be muscle attachment points, right? So you have off the trochanters. This is the back of your femur right there. You got your glute muscles attached over there, right? And it's good. You have this trochanter over here. That's kind of the attachment point. And when you're using your glute muscles and stuff, they're creating a little pull. Right? They're creating a force on the bone. If you looked at a kid's bone, like a baby's bone, right, it would be like very smooth, right? It would look more like, kind of like undifferentiated over here before they start walking. Once they start walking, right, they start using their glutes, right, and their other muscles that might be attached around here. And then as they do so, these kind of become much more prominent right here, right, as they form with use, right? So the bones are responding to the muscle activity, that particular muscle activity, by becoming more, a larger area for them to attach to, a stronger attachment, right? So all these are going to respond to those stresses right there. They're going to grow in response to whatever is happening. So the way, right? So let's say this is your, what muscle is this? Your deltoid tuberosity, right? On your arm, and you're doing lateral raises, and you have a little bump here like this. And when you're doing those raises, right, the bone tendons are pulling, right, on this part of the bone right there, right? Remember, these are collagen fibers that are going into the periosteum, right? But they're creating this tension, pulling on it, right? So that as you get, the more and more you work out, right, this deltoid tuberosity is going to become more prominent, right? So I'm sure if you looked at a weightlifter's skeleton and stuff, they'd have much more like pronounced features like this, right? Where somebody who never worked out their deltoids might have a very few on, right? So that's going to be use dependent sort of processes, prominence of it. The bone, basically, it's growing here, right? It's not just being pulled out, right? It's actually growing to reflect that stress, right? So this brings us to bone remodeling, right? Bone reshaping itself, right, in various ways according to your normal stresses, right? Why does it do it? How does it do it? What are the factors in play here? What kind of things cause it? Not only bone remodeling, but also bone composition, right? How dense your bones are, what the trabecula look like inside, all that'll cover bone remodeling, right? And then the other thing at the end here, what we'll talk about is this bone fracture repair, which will be not quite the same, well, not the same, but it'll be kind of related, right? How bones magically repair themselves to become stronger than usual. But it'll all be about that vascularization as well as those bone cell types. Right. And then the other last part of it is your bone, right? Your healthy bone when you're younger. What'll happen as you get older, right? The bone composition, right? Because eventually, as you get older, it looks more and more like this, right? And we'll see why. All right, but right, we just covered this, but remember osteocytes, there were those cells in the lacuna, the mature cells that were around there maintaining bone tissue, whereas the active cell types, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, right? Reabsorbing bone to get the calcium, making new bone, right? So that's constantly happening, right? And if this happens more than this, you get more bone growth. If this happens more, you get less bone, right? other than that, there would be probably something like equal, right? But this is happening all the time, right? So, but when we're talking about bone remodeling, we'll put a kind of wide category here, changing the shape, the internal architecture, or the actual mineral content of the bone, right? So the question is, when and why might it occur? All right, so the whys are factors that affect bone composition and remodeling, right? And these are the kind of 4 factors that we'll discuss right here: the stresses, nutrition and hormones, and then what happens as you get older. All right, first, for this stress on bones, and this will be kind of covered in your book on the chapters on exercise a little bit, but we'll just kind of talk about it more generally. Right? Your bones are facing particular forces, right? So that if a bone looks a little like this, you see this curvature right here. If the normal compressive forces and tensile forces really on this bone are such like this, that there's more compressional forces on the medial side, right, your bone will eventually remodel itself to kind of reflect that stress and have your everyday normal minimalized stress on that, right? And it doesn't happen because it bends over there, right? It slowly replaces one side. Bone is going to be removed from one side and placed on the other, right? So it's a gradual process, breaking down and making new bone to reflect whatever particular stress is happening. And so this guy over here, right? This is a tennis player. These are tennis players, and people like like sports physiologists, and people studying these kind of things. They love these guys because they have the same genetics on both arms, right? But they're using one arm so much more, right? So you can see like this guy is a left-handed tennis player. This guy's a right-handed tennis player, right? And the bigger arms that you see on their dominant arms are due to something you could obviously is muscle, right? And everybody knows you work out muscles, they get bigger, right? But the other thing is, if you looked at their bones, right, you could look at their bones and it's not a matter of genetics or nutrition or anything like that. It's all about how these people use the bone, right? And what you'd see is, their dominant hand has, a different distribution of density on the, dominant versus the non-dominant arm right there, right? So their bone, like their muscle, is responding to their normal everyday activity, the stresses that are being put upon it, right? Bone growing more dense, right? On the side that are, in areas where it's being used, right? So this is what he would look like. This is what they look like with a lot of work. So, that could come from exercise. It could come from your normal everyday gravitational forces on the bones, right? Some people's, your femoral neck is at a slightly different angle in your hip bone right there, and that will put different pressure on your femur, right? The different regions of your femur, right? And then we're going to see that the internal architecture of your femur is going to reflect, that, genetics of whatever shape you ended up as, right? So all these variations, it's going to be reflected internally to best sort of suit that particular stress. So in this case, don't worry about the details here. You just want to get a picture, a big picture, right? You have a load going down the center of your body right here, right? And there's going to be compressional forces, maybe on the medial side in this case, right? On this side, compressional forces, right? And on the other side, you're going to have tension, right? The bone's actually feeling some kind of stress being pulled in this way, right? So you get these competing compression and tension on one side versus the other, right? And in the middle, in the medullary cavity, right, it'll be blank. That's why you can have a big space there. So how this is going to end up being reflected is the trabecula, right? All the struts, all that spongy bone in the middle, right? This is kind of showing a more schematic picture of these lines here that are going to face the compression, the purple ones, versus the blue ones here facing the tensional forces right there, right? And if you look at these trabecula, the way they're aligned, right, they will reflect that everyday stress, right? And the major point here is that your internal architecture here is going to remodel itself based on the particular load that your bones are normally facing. All right. So that is what's happening at a gross level, right? Now we're going back to the cells, right, of the bone and kind of look at how that might happen, right? And you could probably already guess, right? But one thing I want to mention is, the osteoblasts and osteoclasts are the ones that are making and breaking bone. But remember those osteocytes in there, they're also, they're in the everywhere in the bone, right? They're sitting in there. They've got all these processes coming out of their cell, right? They're going through the canaliculi and they're connected to some kind of blood supply. And they're also connected with the other osteocytes in here. And they'll also eventually be able to signal to the osteoblasts and osteoclasts, right? So what this means is that, again, I'm not going to actually test you on this, right? But the osteocytes are in the lacuna. They're facing these loads over here, right? And when it does that, right, it's going to cause a particular fluid flow through these canaliculi, right? Which means that the osteocytes are feeling what's going on in a particular direction, right? So in this way, they can actually talk to each other and say, okay, we seem to be facing a lot of stress here. Let's build some bone. Let's talk to our friends, the osteoblasts, right? And they can kind of help direct them to make new bone here, maybe inhibit the osteoclast a little bit, right? But that's how it's done. It's at a more mechanical level, right? Those are the cells that might be responsible. Bottom line is trabecular aligning with the stresses put on your bone by either the gravitational forces, right, of your body and the functional stress, right? All those lines. So that's a big part about bone remodeling, right? And so again, it's all due, those osteocytes are going to direct the activity of the osteoblasts making new bone, as well as the osteoclasts breaking down bone, right? All possible because these cells exist and bone is constantly doing this, right? It's doing it for calcium homeostasis, but it's also doing it so that we can optimize the way our bone is organized. So when we're talking about, all this mechanical stress, it's an important point. If you want strong, healthy bones, right, not only do you have to have all the proper nutrition, but you also need to work those bones, right? It's a well-known, fact that astronauts, they go up to space, they don't use their muscles, right? There's no gravitational forces constantly acting on them. Or if you have an injury, you're sitting on a couch for a couple of months, you're not using your bones start to waste away, just like your muscles, right? So what'll happen is that osteoclast activity will become dominant, right? Because your body, bone is expensive tissue. If it's not using it, it does what your body does to get rid of, right? So weight-bearing activities that are going to put stress on your bones, squats, deadlifts, are really the best thing, not only for building overall muscle strength, but for building bone density, right? Like aerobic stuff, that's great for all your cardiovascular, right? But you do want to add in a lot of high impact, these things for bone formation. All right, so that is stress. And then the next two are nutrition and hormones, and they're kind of interrelated for reasons we've already gone over, right? Calcium is the essential mineral, right? It has to be there. You need it just for those osteoblasts can do it. And then vitamin D, which is, a vitamin, but it's also going to be act as a hormone. It's going to be necessary for the proper absorption and transport of calcium and other minerals from the digestive system, right? And this is all the stuff we already talked about, right? PTH. PTH is going to break down bone and everything to get that calcium and reabsorb stuff, right? So that is a factor. What if you don't have enough calcium levels, which you're not drinking enough milk or whatever, low blood calcium, it just keeps on taking from the bone, right? Or for some reason you don't have enough vitamin D, you're not absorbing calcium. That's another problem too, right? So your body needs calcium more than it needs bone, right? Immediately. So if, you don't, first thing that happens, right? If you're not, your calcium is going to be used where it's really needed, right? In your brain and your muscles and stuff. And so it keeps on taking away from your bone, right? When you have lack of vitamin D or calcium and phosphate stuff, right? You're prone to these soft kind of bones right there that, don't have the compressional strength because of the lack of mineralized matrix, right? They're going to bend under the weight of your whole body, right? A lot of these are vitamin D deficits, right? Back in the day when they had kids working in factories, from going from the farm to the factory where they weren't in the sun anymore, this big case of like big phenomena of rickets came up, and in other countries in the world where this is a problem. All right, so it's lack of minerals basically. And then the other, as far as vitamins go, remember the organic component of bones, collagen. There should be collagen over here. Right? Vitamin A and C are required for production of collagen, which will not only give bone its sort of flexibility, so bones are kind of brittle without collagen. They also, the attachment points, right? That's why the scurvy thing, you get loss of teeth and all that stuff. Right? So vitamin A and C, all these vitamins are important. And then related to that, all the hormones that are regulating calcium levels and collagen synthesis, right? Based on your needs right there. What are those? Right? We talked about those insulin-like growth factors. We talked about the thyroid hormones. And then there's testosterone and estrogen, right? Stimulating bone growth during puberty and maintaining the mass right there, right? So for androgens and estrogens, right? They're going to act. They're also going to act on those osteoclasts and osteoblasts, right? They're both promoting bone growth in some way. So they might do it in various ways, right? They might inhibit osteoclast activity, so less bone is broken down. They might promote the death of osteoclasts. That's what this is called right here. Less bone breaking down, right? Or they might promote osteoblasts like growth and differentiation and activity. Or they might stop the cells from dying. So all those are leading to overall bone growth right here, right? Testosterone, estrogens. So stress, nutrition, and hormones, right? All these are big factors right here, right? In maintaining basically your bone composition. And then the last part is aging, right? How it affects bone remodeling just as a natural course of events, right? So here, I'm going to tell you something personal about myself. I'm going to share that with you, that I have a condition. The condition is called chronological aging syndrome. And it means every day I get older. Every single day I get older and my body just starts deteriorating, right? So when you're getting, a certain age of development, you're getting better and better and better. It starts to slow down, right? When I was in my 40s, people would say, hey, you're in your 30s, I look great. As soon as you hit 50, something happens, right? Nobody says, you tell them, I tell them I'm in my 60s and they say, well, you look pretty good for your 60s, right? But there's a big precipitous drop over here, right? And where your body just starts going to shit, right? And one of the big things with this is how it affects your skeletal system, right? And basically what it means is your body has been working its whole life, right? All the cells of your body have been working really, really hard to keep you healthy and in shape. And then they just slowly give up, right? They stop doing what they're supposed to be doing. And everything starts breaking down according to the second law of thermodynamics, which means, the law, everything tends toward disorder, right? Because you need a lot of energy to kind of fight that, and your body just gives up. All right. So as far as that, right, two principal effects, aging and bone tissue, you're going to lose bone mass and your bones are going to become more brittle, right? So as you grow, right, and then when you're growing and everything, your bones are continuously adding new bone mass, right? And that starts slowing down. And then at some point, young adults, that equals out, right? So that you're gaining as much as you are losing, right? You can have a lot of bone remodeling up to that point over here, right? But at a certain age, it stops, it slows down. And for males, it slows down kind of gradually, right? In general, for everybody, right? You just start to decrease your bone mass, right? Your osteoblast activity kind of slows down. Maybe your osteoclast activity doesn't so much. So that's going to be into decline. For females, number one, they're starting off with a lot less bone density. And the second thing is the age at which this big precipitous drop happens. Right about here, right over here, this is around menopause, right? And this is what happens at menopause is you start to decrease in estrogen. Right? And estrogen was one of those things that were really promoting, maintaining your bone mass and promoting osteoblast, inhibiting osteoclast activity, right? This is why it happens more. They're starting off with less, and then they have that loss of estrogen. Whereas, this is a thing that happens as a consequence of age. Even though testosterone levels drop in males, testosterone, secretion is more of it's not really dependent on those cycles, right? Where you just normal cycles of life. It's dependent on other things. But the bottom line is, right, your bones start to decrease in mass, right? They start to become more porous because it's mostly in your spongy bone area. So all this starts to get broken down a little bit, right? And also, just general, your fibroblasts that were producing and osteoblasts that were producing collagen start to slow down, so you have less collagen, right? That makes it more brittle as well. So all this means is they're lighter and they're much more prone to breakage. All right, so in the condition, which would be clinical at that point, would be osteoporosis, porous bone, right? Happening in your spongy bone, basically a healthy bone with its normal sort of pores, right? Starts to just break down and you get less and less, right? It's going to happen in these weight-bearing bones, like your vertebrae and your hips and your femur, right? And that's where they're going to be more prone to damage. In fact, that's one reason, not the only reason, but that's one reason why like older people get shorter actually, because these start to get more and more compressed, your vertebrae. You also lose water in your fibrocartilage, but your actual spine shortens, you actually get smaller. All right, so in this case, you have that imbalance of bone cells, right? Bone is broken down faster than your osteoblast can lay it down, right? So when I say that most your cells activity slows down, I don't mean osteoclasts. For some reason, they're still doing their thing, right? And it's usually happening in the spongy bone, right? And the inside of bone is the most affected. And your vertebrae, your hip bones, your femur are the ones that tend to get the most affected. Right, so here's the healthy bone. Bone reabsorption equals bone formation, right? And then at a certain age, right, you get that more breakdown than you do building up. So your bone starts to become more and more porous, right? This will happen all over your body, to some extent. You could see older people's, their facial features become less distinct because their facial bone, the sharpness of their facial bone, like protuberances and stuff, starts to become less distinct as well. Right? So, this is something that is going to happen, right? It happens to everybody. It's not to say that after 35 or something, you can't continue to stimulate bone growth by doing like really good weight-bearing exercises, right? Even it's just slower, right? It's like muscle growth. Whatever you can do over here takes a little bit longer over here. Not only bone growth, but bone repair, right? All that stuff is going to take a little longer, but you still could do it, right? It's still very important to keep really active. And the more active you are, the slower, the less bad this slope is right here. But the other thing is, during these early stages, you want to build it up, right? So you'll have more to lose, right? You want to start off right? Before this decline, you want to start off with more in the bank, basically, right? So now's the time to kind of really focus on doing that. All right, so use it or lose it, increase your bone mass. That's my public service announcement. And best ones, muscle and bones. For strength building overall, they're not going to necessarily get you like big muscles, but they're going to build, because they're working so many of your muscles and your bones. These are the best ones to do.